So again, welcome everyone to tonight's Faith and Culture Conversation. My name is Kelly and I serve as one of the associates at St. Paul's Episcopal Church, focusing on formation and program development and newcomer ministries. So it's such a pleasure to see so many of you all tonight. We've done these conversations as a webinar, as Zoom meeting, and also in person. Just to be mindful of some of the viruses that have been surging, and just for the sake of kind of encouraging folks to attend from different places, we've chosen to do it on Zoom. So we appreciate you all being here. And first, I would love to introduce our two co-facilitators. So we have Christine Luckritz Marquis. She is an associate professor of church history at Union Presbyterian Seminary. And then we have Dave Coogan, who is an associate professor of English at VCU. Both Dave and Christine have been doing these faith and culture conversations for over a year now, and it's been such a pleasure. And they're also both parishioners at St. Paul's. So I will turn things over to Christine, who will introduce our speakers tonight.
Thank you so much, Kelly. So I get the profound privilege of introducing our conversation partners tonight. So we have Reverend Ashley Diaz Mejias, who is one of the co-pastors of the Voices of Jubilee, which is a new worshiping community accompanying incarcerated youth and their families in Central Virginia. Ashley also works with the Richmond Community Bail Fund and lives in Richmond with her husband and 3 daughters. And the Reverend Lauren Ramseur is the co-pastor of Voices of Jubilee with Ashley. She's served as a pastor for over 20 years in a variety of contexts. She has served as a pastor to men on Georgia's death row and has been deeply involved in the death penalty abolition movement. She's a restorative justice practitioner and serves on the board of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy and for Rise for Youth. Lauren and her husband, Doug, are parents of 2 children. She's a graduate of James Madison University and Candler School of Theology at Emory University. So we are so excited to have them here to talk to us tonight about incarceration justice, and welcome, welcome. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you both for being here. We're going to get things kicked off, started with a question for both of you to give us a common denominator for our conversation that follows, that gets into our topic about incarceration justice. Let's start out. If you can both tell us a little bit more about faith, how you came to know faith, when, where, why, how, and how it informs your life today.
You can, yeah. For me, one of my experiences of the faith that I feel like has been most impactful to me was after college. I went to work and volunteer for Habitat for Humanity International down in Americus, Georgia, and there met a group of committed Christians who from around the world had moved there with the vision of eliminating poverty housing worldwide. And they were deeply committed to their faith and also living it out in a new way, and really trying to build a new way of living in the world where everyone would have access to what they needed for abundant life. And that was a really new experience for me to experience that whole, for Christians to be really choosing a whole different way of life and really trying to build the beloved community with their whole lives. And that was a deeply impactful faith experience for me.
Thank you. Lauren?
I think I would say for me, faith has been an animating force throughout my life, and I think what I know of faith is that it kind of resists the narratives of violence that we all experience, and the ways that I think grown to the point that I am now, where Lauren and I are able to do this ministry work, have come kind of in chunks of seeing resistance in communities similar to what Lauren described. I've had some similar experiences, and then witnessing people of faith really entering into these places on the margin and standing with people on the margin. I've witnessed people on the margin living lives of hope and resistance in spite of what empire can do to them. And that is what I read of Jesus in the Bible. So that is what I know of faith.
Thank you. Thank you. So these are really sort of good and powerful moments that you've shared with us. But have there ever been moments where you've struggled to reconcile your faith with new experiences unfolding? So I don't know.
Never. No.
No.
Never struggle.
It's like it's not a problem at all, right? Yeah.
Not a problem for me. I feel great about my faith all the time. Yeah, I think it is impossible to live as a person of faith and fully stand and live in a world where the things happen that we know happen in this world, whether that's with climate or with any form of violence. And I think when you are crossing back and forth across that border of the prison, often, particularly we are coming at this as not directly impacted people, which I think is a really important, I think we need to name that and acknowledge that is our lens. And it sounds like you all will be getting to hear from some folks who themselves are speaking from that most important place. But I think it is very difficult. And I know for me, like witnessing what other humans are able to do to one another and the way that violence is regenerated over and over again, it challenges your framework of hope. Like your idea of hope has to flex and change, and you have to release that again and again and again. But Lauren and I are actually talking about this in the car today. I do think that as followers of Jesus, we have a unique kind of aspect of our faith, in that we follow a God who dies. And I'm not someone, I don't want to like fetishize suffering, but I do think that is for me, each time I felt as though I can no longer claim a God in a world where there are warehouses full of people who I'm supposed to say bear the image of God, and they're put in there by other people who I'm supposed to say bear the image of God. And there are very violent things that have happened. I'm brought back to that place of remembering these tenets of my faith story. So it's often extraordinarily difficult. And also we are working with children. We work with children as young as 11 who are in jumpsuits, who sleep in jail cells in the state of Virginia, in Chesterfield, Virginia. And it is extraordinarily difficult to receive those things and to carry them. So yeah, do you want to add?
No, I think you said it all. Yeah.
You know, I can add, I can add, because you just kind of jogged some memories for me, the way you described that movement in and out. I spent so much time moving in and out of the Richmond City Jail, and I know it's not working with children, but there were times when I prayed going into the jail that I'd be given the words to actually be able to articulate what I was feeling and experiencing, because I knew that my own rational consciousness was insufficient to the task at hand, because the kind of suffering that you're alluding to, it's really kind of bizarre and disheartening and dispiriting in so many ways to walk in and out of that suffering. If I think that's what I hear you both saying, is like you're going into Bon Air Juvenile Detention Center, you're working with these children, and to me, I mean, props to you for that, because everything that I've heard at the jail from grown-up men and women is made worse when they're remembering what happened to them as children. And I can't imagine what it would be like day in, day out to be hearing it directly from children. So that's something I'm really curious to hear you all speak more about.
Yeah. You know, I think for me, our faith only really makes sense And faith only makes sense. The suffering of the world only makes sense when you understand it from the lens of standing at the foot of the cross.
Yeah.
And that's where we stand with children who are incarcerated. They're children who've suffered a lot of trauma and some of whom have committed great acts of violence, some who haven't. And we stand at the foot of the cross at this intersection of violence in our world. And it really is the only place where I believe you can really understand the hope that is the resurrection and the life. And because it is also in those places where I have found ridiculous resurrection hope and standing in solidarity with sisters and brothers in these most difficult times, and cracks in this depraved system that allow tremendous acts of light in, and the resilience of these young people to retain their humanity, to love us deeply despite what has been done to them and is being done to them, and to love others deeply. And so it is really kind of those places where there is that rub that I find that is really the only place to stand, to have faith. Some of the kids that the graciousness I've experienced in standing with people on the margins has given me a great gift of faith.
Yeah. I'm wondering if both of you could speak on this next question about the contrast between what you just described of that experience of mercy and salvation and witnessing at the foot of the cross when you're in the Bon Air Juvenile Detention Center versus the kind of experience of faith that you maybe got prior to that outside of the jail, outside in a church or in society. There's these two cultures going on. There's this culture that you're bearing witness to of faith as emerging from these moments of crisis and injustice. But then there's this other side that you must have learned about faith in the culture of the church, which I think more people here are probably familiar with just from their own upbringings. Could you compare the two?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a big one. I know.
No, it's a great question. I was telling Kelly and Chrissy before, I'm like a wannabe type A, so I'm like wanting to make a list in my head, but it's totally scrambled. But that relates to, I think, how I would answer this question. I think my own I was raised in an Episcopalian church, and then had, I think, really like my own personal like intimacy with God. That sounds super inappropriate. Like my kind of like coming to a more like sense of calling came through kind of a winding semi-evangelical path. And I think what from my journey with the churches and the organizations that I participated in and still have a connection to, and this is a significant tension in our work now, a strong every single day tension for us. But I don't really, this might sound a little strong, but I think what has been hard is that I sometimes experience in the church, like the tentacles of empire, like kind of the same structures and demands for profit and demands for like, how many kids are you all meeting with? And like one of our first conversations 5 years ago when we started, Lauren's been doing this for 20 some odd years. I've been doing this for the last 11 years. And not with children. We've just been doing this with children for the last 5, but both of us have worked with adults. And one of the first conversations we had as we were getting started, and these are all, this is not to demonize particular people. I think it's really the culture that we're in, was about like, are we going to record the children that you all are working with? Will they become members? Like, how will they become insiders in our culture? And I think what we have been learning about abolition, and what I think many of us have maybe encountered over the last 2 years really intensely, but I think even far before then, is that these kinds of structures put people over profit. These kinds of structures about counting and like making your time make sense. And even in the church world, there are a lot of similarities to like a business, or even in a nonprofit, there are a lot of demands. You get audited, you follow a lot of these things. And so I think what has been beautiful is that as we enter the prison, we have an opportunity to scramble that. Like, we get to go in there, and I think a word that's used a lot is we get to queer that norm, right? We get to go in there and we sit with these children in a way that is not about trying to change them, not about trying to make them the way that fits our imagination. And we get an opportunity to cross the Gina Dent, who's Angela Davis's partner, talks a lot about borders, the false border between the prison and in the prison, there's a border between the free world and the incarcerated world. And, we have borders around our country, and we really adhere to all these borders and rules. And our opportunity in faith is to follow Jesus. And Jesus queered these. Jesus scrambled it all for us. Jesus said, you're asking the wrong questions. It doesn't matter what you eat. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you're circumcised. And I think what this has taught us, sorry, I'm speaking for you. You're doing great. What Jesus has taught me in these places, even when I worked with men, I did pastoral care with men and then with some women. And even in those places, I would catch myself like trying to fit into that, like pastoral care for me in this place should be about like imparting wisdom, and I think the longer I'm doing this, the more I'm realizing that my hope for the church on the outside is that we can scramble all of that too, because what we're doing, I think, is changing. And the word dying is thrown around a lot, but I think it's changing, and I think there's a lot of space for the Holy Spirit to work. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Oh, absolutely. You painted a very clear picture between the two cultures. Thank you for that.
And I think one of the things that I've carried with me too, on the other side of that, is that in my formation in the church, and I grew up going to the Methodist church, the Presbyterian church. My parents' best friends were Episcopal priests, and my best friend was Catholic. So I got all the church. I was real churched. Mm-hmm. But in all those traditions, I was taught about the image of God, mm-hmm. Imago Dei. And I think that is the thing that has carried me across this border, and it allowed me to go back and forth, because that was a deep formation I had as a young person, growing up in the church, that all of us are made in the image of God. And that is, I think, the work that I do now is helping all of us to see the image of God in one another, and reminding the children that they are made in the image of God. One of the questions we got this year that has been has just stayed in my heart was one of the children we were visiting with asked me if I thought he could get in, if I thought he would get into heaven if he had tattoos. Oh. And he asked me this several times. And I said, well, I think if God had a body, that it would be covered with tattoos. So that's what you need to know.
Yeah. Before Christine takes us to the next phase of our conversation, I want to remind everybody here, use the chat if you want to add your own questions or comments on anything you've heard so far. Thank you. Go ahead, Christine.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you both so much. So, and I love your response to God would be tattooed everywhere. I think that's beautiful. But that question and a couple of the other things in your response kind of leads to this discussion of culture, right? Like, we're in in this larger culture, but there's this sort of boundary that is being, these borders that are being falsely created, right? So there's this tension in these cultures, right? That like this idea about bodies with tattoos, or the idea of deciding if you need to count them as members. And so I wonder if those things you would like to elaborate on more, or if there are other places where you've really experienced sort of tension in sort of incarcerated culture in this faith-filled way, right? Versus the rest of the tentacles of empire that you were sort of referencing, or other places in the culture, like even just, you know, the culture of living your lives beyond this.
Yeah. I think one of the I'm just trying to think of I don't know that I have anything to say right now. Please come back to me on that one.
Sure.
You start to have some reflection.
I mean, I think we live with a lot of tension. I mean, there are a lot of stories that we have, you know, I think, and I'm sure Dave, I know you relate to this. You kind of carry these stories, and they are not your stories. But you, in a way, they're like your tattoos, right? Like they will never leave you. And it is a privilege to carry them, but some of them are so, they are heavy. And, you know, I think one of the heavy tensions that we live in is the place of really, you know, for various reasons, both of us have deep connections with victims, with people who have suffered deep violence, and yet we also look at closely in the faces of not just children but adults as well, who have been perpetrators of deep violence. And so I know for me personally, if a tension that I think my faith has really taken me into is that place of, I want to know where God is in that. And I think I am thankful that our culture is moving more in the direction of like grace and or I don't know where we are right this second with our administration, but of wanting to like deal more broadly with like nonviolent crimes. And I think those are important moves, but I think in my heart of hearts, my hope, my like resurrection hope is for a day when there are restorative, and I don't think I should have the answer because I am not, but I have hope for a day when we can face that which is too terrible, and not turn immediately to retribution. There's one young man that we are very close with who we met at Bon Air, and he was convicted of capital crimes? Is that what they were? Capital crimes when he was 15, and was given a 72-year sentence as a 15. And I think we went to court with him several times, and that's part of our practice as we are a courtroom presence with these young people. And in that courtroom, you hear kind of you are, I don't think adequately, but in a sense you were asked for a moment to hold what human beings who have suffered on both sides of this are living their lives with, which is deep pain. So I think that, I don't know if that answers your question, but that is something that I often.
No, and if I can piggyback on what you said, because you jogged my memory of the I spent some time in Bon Air, bringing my students from VCU there, years ago. And I remember when we walked through, as we were getting a little bit of preparation from the staff there, and the leader there, one of the COs, said to my students, she's like, okay, you're about to go meet them. And I know you're thinking maybe these are just like kids that they snuck out of the house, they went drinking, or, you know, whatever, and they stole a car or something. You could meet an axe murderer. And she painted this real vivid picture of the children you're about to meet could be, you know, like the axe murderer, the serial killer, the most violent thing you could ever imagine. So she wanted to kind of disabuse us of the idea that these are just acting out teens. And I thought about that, and she did give some evidence of that. There was one kid in there who had lit the whole house on fire and people almost died. And it was really bad. But what ran through my mind was not so much that fire or this potential idea that all kids were like that, but the tension that I had always experienced coming in and out of the city jail, of meeting people whose humanity was so much bigger than any one thing that they had done. And to lock people into this narrative of the one bad thing that in some cases is truly horrendous, in other cases is whatever, it locks us into this thoughtless loop. The crime is thoughtless, the punishment is thoughtless, society becomes thoughtless. And so I got into this mode of like self-talk, like, what can I do from my faith that will help me kind of, you know, you called it queering the norm. I guess I thought of it as just like disrupting the system or interjecting, but like, what kind of counter logic can I do with this? And like you said about Jesus earlier, I had the same image going through my head. Like Jesus didn't go to the comfortable place to preach to the choir. It was like the people in the society of his day that were not comfortable, that were on the outskirts, that were not empowered in the least. And so I thought about that. I thought, like, well, I'm comfortable. I'm definitely in the mainstream, but now I'm choosing to go outside of that. Why? And then, I don't know, it's probably happened to you as well, but like for me, it just, this feedback loop of reflexing or reflexive activity just opened up, and it really hasn't stopped for the 15 or 20 years that I've been doing this. I'm always learning something new about my faith because of the tensions that you're describing.
And I think one of the tensions, like you've said, is that we forget that the system of mass incarceration impacts all of us. And as people of faith, we are called to be practicing forgiveness and reconciliation. And Jesus was very clear about the work of forgiveness and how central that was to his mission and ministry. And even on the cross, as he's being executed, he is forgiving. It is to be a central practice of people of faith. And yet we have created and we continue to sustain a system that is fully focused on retribution. There is no restoration, there is no forgiveness, there is no accountability in our system. And there's a lot of tension in that.
There's an illusion of accountability.
There's an illusion of accountability, yes, and illusion of promises of healing, but there is none. One of my mentors was one of the friends I visited on death row in Georgia, and he was on death row in Georgia for 30 years. And I visited him all the way until the day of his execution. And one of the things that happens when our government executes people is one of the last things they do is they go into your cell and they take a list of everything that you own, and they write it down. And then they take all your stuff to be delivered to your family upon your execution. And it's one of the ways that the system dehumanizes people and turns them into objects to be categorized and sorted. And so Jack my friend Jack Alderman, he was a man of great faith. And so in resistance to that, before he knew they would come around, he knew the practice. And so he gave away all of his belongings. And so when they came, the officers came with their clipboard to his cell, he had nothing, absolutely nothing. And they were like, they didn't know what to do. They were like, where's your stuff? Well, we have this clipboard and this paper to fill out. There's a system that has to be completed for us to do this. And you've just turned it on its head.
Yeah.
He also, in the days before execution, you can add some special visitors to your visitation list. And so Jack put on his visitation list, Jesus, Buddha, and Muhammad.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Beautiful.
Giving his stuff away, and then he had to get it
Oh,
back.
yeah. So also when he gave his stuff away that night, as often happened, he did receive a reprieve from the governor, a stay of execution. And so then all of his friends who were who'd received the gift of his stuff gave him his stuff back, because then he given a few more months to live while the lawyers fought for his case. And then when given an execution date again, he did it again and gave it all away. So he refused to be objectified by the state, which sought to turn him into an object and make it easier for them to kill this person.
Quick follow-up, Lauren. Did you stay through till the end when he finally did get his execution date?
Yes, we were, as his pastors, we were able to stay with him until like the hour before they took him away to be prepared, to be shaved and prepared for execution. We did not go and stay in the room. He did not want us to experience that terror and to be subject to that violence. And so we said our very tearful goodbyes at that point, and they took him away.
What was that like for you?
It was horrendous. To accompany someone who bears the image of God, whom I had only known really as a spiritual guide of sorts. I mean, he was, when I met him, he was, 25 years out from the act that sent him to prison. And there were some questions of his innocence. I don't know if he was innocent or not. But who he had become and who he had always been and who he lived into was a beautiful, loving, generous human being. And to stand in the midst of this death machine and watch a friend be carried away unto their death is a bizarre and horrendous experience. I'm thankful that I wasn't alone, but with my mentors, Murphy Davis and Ed Loring, and we drove home together and wept. And, even in that space, and this is where the Holy Spirit enters in, there's laughter. Like there was joy because we were not owned by that system, right? Jack chose his freedom. He chose his humanity. And the state, even the most horrific violence that the state could dish out, could not take that from him. And so that day of his execution, we told stories, we laughed, we celebrated life, and the system could not win. So it's all of those tensions, right? It is the holy of the holy spaces and the standing at the foot of the cross, like nothing I've ever experienced. But
can I ask a follow-up question? Because I think that holiness has got to be part of what brings you back into these spaces. But I also hear there is like a lot of hurt and a lot of pain. Like before, when you guys sign on, you've just been visiting someone, right? Before you came on this evening to speak with us, and so what are the what is it that brings you back there? I mean, I know that it's your faith, and in some ways, but like, and like, what do you do in those in between moments? Because this is a lifelong commitment, and and now you're doing it with children, which I can only imagine is slightly more painful, especially as parents. So yeah, I don't.
So I would say it's the joy that brings me back. You know, before the work I was doing immediately before this was I was a pastor for children, youth, and families at Bon Air Presbyterian Church.
Okay.
And I am still a pastor for youth, children, and families. And I have so much fun going and reading scripture with the kids on Sunday afternoons. Like last week, we went in and I read to them the story of the Magi, and they loved it. They love hearing the scriptures. We read them together. We read the scriptures, taking one verse at a time. And they ask the best questions. Some of them are quite ridiculous, but they are so engaged in like really encountering this living word. And I was able to talk to them about how when the Magi encounter love incarnate, they are changed and they go home a different way. And so we were able to talk about how we experience love incarnate in our world and in our lives, and how we can never be the same again. And I told them how when I meet them in prison, when I meet them where they are, I said, I encounter love incarnate in you, and I go home changed, and I'm never the same again. And I walk home a different path. And one of our practices is one of our benedictions, which came from the practice of Angela Davis, was that when we exit the prison, we always walk out backwards. So we get to the door and we turn around and we walk out backwards, committing to remember the children who are incarcerated there until we are all free and living in the beloved community, and committing to work for their liberation and ours. And so I told them that story, and they thought it was hilarious. They were like, you walk backwards? Don't people look at you like weird? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Said, yes, they do. They look at us weird, like, what are you doing? But that is the way of faith. It is to walk a different path. And that's the path we're all called to. And it's a path you're called to. And it's so much fun to share the scriptures with them and to see it come alive in their imaginations. And that is what brings me back.
Thank you.
Christine, did you notice we have a question from the chat? Did you see? I will read it to you both in case you can't see it. The question is, do you see signs of restorative justice gaining traction in Richmond?
I think that is a really important question. There is an initiative. We've supported it and learned a little bit about it through the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, which seems like a great sign. It's hard. I think I do see that sign. I think there are great practitioners doing really important work. We are both on the advisory board for Rise for Youth, and really support Valerie Slater and the work that she does. And that is a significant part of her lens. So if anyone is having a moment where you're like, what in the world do we practically do? I would direct you to her website and to their organization as a like legislative priority place. She is as just a brilliant legal mind, as well as a person of faith, as well as someone who her organization is led by impacted people and stands with youth. My training and belief really is that true restorative justice will come with bigger changes to our system. But I do think, any practice that we have, there is like actual restorative justice, right? That we do. That is a practice. You need trained people to facilitate it, and that is important to state. Like that is a highly specific practice. But I think I would say the kind of entering into the landscape of abolition you'll find a lot of restorative practices. And it's not just about what we do on the outside, but it largely starts with kind of healing your own relationship with retribution and with punishment. And it sounds a little like, we're in a world that is crumbling. We need to do something now. But I think that one restorative practice that we can all start with is kind of attending to that somatic space of what are my reactions to punishment, and to what are these kind of structures of violence, and the structures that we live within, what do those bring up within me, and how can I be in this world in a way that is peaceful? And thank you for putting the Rise for Youth website up there. And there are actually organizations that do restorative justice. There's one in particular with violent offenders, which is incredibly courageous and hopeful to me. That is, these are not people of explicit faith, but that to me is faithful work. And it's called Common Justice, and it's in New York City. And I would really encourage you to check out their work as well, if you're curious about what that might look like. So that was a long answer. I'm sorry.
No.
A good answer too. Yeah, there's another one in California. Sunny Schwartz's group that goes into the jails, and she has a book about it called "Not the Monster Factory," and the title just tells you everything you need to know about what it is. If you take the perspective of restoring people back to their I guess equilibrium, or where they ought to be, as opposed to this retribution model, then you can't start with the conception that they're monsters and they're incorrigible, that prisons are just designed to create more monsters, because that's really what we've been doing for generations now, is imagining that only the worst of the worst belong there. It's that image that the person years ago at Bon Air gave me of the axe murderer. As long as you can make this leap in your imagination that everybody in a jail or a prison is an axe murderer, or whatever your phrase is for the worst of the worst, then you don't have that door open for the possibility of change. And I love the way you highlighted the humor earlier in your remarks about, or just the sense of lightness and joy that comes from that journey of discovery of these better parts of ourselves, because that's been my experience as well. People would sometimes ask me, why do you keep going back? And I would have the exact, almost word for word, the same reason that you gave, is because I keep learning more about my faith, and I actually enjoy spending time with these people here. The retribution model is the opposite of that. There's no sense of discovery of people or of faith or of justice. And that's what I was trying to get at when I said the crime might be thoughtless, the punishment is thoughtless. We all become thoughtless. So to become thoughtful, we'd really have to figure out what our incentives are in spending time with people who are at their worst moments and in the worst places in life and at the worst institutions.
Yeah, we talk a lot about restorative justice, and I think a term and kind of I do a lot of work with the Richmond Community Bail Fund. We started that about 6 or so years ago, and I am by far the oldest person amongst in that group. Most of the folks that work with us are like in their 20s, but what I've learned from them, it has been one of the most incredible experiences of my life, because being with these folks, they have, I'm like a soccer, I'm not technically a soccer, well, I have one kid that plays soccer, but I'm like a soccer mom with a minivan. And I think, I came at this with the idea, and in some ways, came at many things because of my whiteness and my privilege, from an angle that wasn't open to total transformation. And I think the notion of transformative justice has really rocked my world. It has messed everything up for me. And what I mean by that is you know, I can't just build a really tight nonprofit that's going to like do this one thing really well. Like that is important and great. And I think those are good things. And I don't want to minimize that. But my hope and my vision has to first acknowledge and look at these tentacles of empire. And I have to see that. And then I have to really begin in these small ways for building, you know, Lauren talks a lot about using the language of beloved community or transformative community. And, you know, I'm with these young folks who do a lot of, they have been doing mutual aid and, you know, they do a lot of resource sharing and our work is like total, because of the bail fund grew so quickly, not on purpose. We totally scrambled up the entire system of bail like in the state of Virginia accidentally because we were paying too many bails and all the courts are struggling to pay us back. And so it's become this big mess, but people are getting free. So I think the language of transformative justice and Adrienne Marie Brown has been really helpful for me in that. I think it has rocked my world. So I want to offer her as a resource too. I am not an expert. I'm just a journeyer on this, but and I agree. I go back because it is awesome. I love my job. I love it. And I laugh so hard. These kids are crazy and they're hilarious and wonderful. And it's I mean, this is a great.
Well, yeah. No, I just need to, I just want to say part of the reason I wanted to ask is because I kind of knew that would be the answer, you know, and I think the cultural piece that runs alongside, like, imagine your axe murderer or whatever, your most awful that we feed culturally, right? That there are monsters there, is also they must just be miserable all the time, you know, like I think, and so I think it's really important for us who are not incarcerated to remember that there is texture and complexity, right, in that space, and it's not this flat thing, even as it's horrible and capable of great terror. So yeah, thank you. I think remembering there's joy can be really transformative and resistant, right? So we have a couple more questions in the chat. The first one is, for the children inside, can you bring children who have been there and have them share their stories as encouragement?
We are really grateful that we have, our group has been led by amazing mentors and returning citizens who, some of whom at one time were incarcerated as juveniles at the places where we visit. And now as adults later on in life, they, thank God, are free and outside of the incarceration system and give their lives generously, deeply generously to this work of transformative justice. And they come in and mentor and share their stories and bear witness. And they are our teachers and our leaders, and we couldn't do this work without them.
And I think it is, in the most concrete way, that is a moment of resurrection. When you see a person standing in front of you who the system proclaimed dead. Those are the people that we get to stand next to in our work. These are men who were given life plus 25-year sentences, and there's still breath in their lungs, and they are saying to these children, you are not, what you said, Dave, you are not the worst thing you have ever done. That is gospel news.
Yes. Which I stole from Brian Stevenson, by the way. I'm going to give you full credit. We have another question from the chat. Do you have any experience working with transgender or queer youth in the system, or any advice on what we can do to support those folks?
They are, they make up a definable portion of the kids that we visit with, as children who have been rejected and hurt and terrorized for their identities.
They're over-policed.
Yeah. And so, yeah, absolutely. And I think all the things that we do to build, beloved community and create a world where all people have a seat at the welcome table, where all people are included and loved and honored and respected. All of that education, I think we always have to start with ourselves, and undoing our own biases and working through our own journey, and then sharing that journey with others and doing all we can to support those youth wherever they are, keeps them out of the system. So I have that. I don't know if you have anything else to add there.
Yeah, I mean, I just was going to say we do have relationships with one transgender youth in particular, who's now a young adult. And I think the system is not a safe place, because the world is not a safe place. That does not, and I think one way of supporting, because of kind of the combination of gender and race and, all of those things, you find children in the system who are really suffering, and there are queer children who are really suffering, and for us, showing up for them and then inviting partners in who can show up for them and speak life to them in the way that our mentors speak life has been incredibly important.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was wondering if you guys could say just a little bit, because I realized this would be important perhaps for folks to know. Can you talk a little bit about how you end up with youth working with you? So how does that happen? Because you're plugged in pretty early sometimes if you're in court with them.
So we started as responding to a request from the youth who are at the Bon Air Juvenile Correctional Center, that they wanted a gospel choir. And so Ashley and I got together and gathered some of our very talented musician friends and asked them if they would lead a choir. And we would do all the paperwork and open the door
and not sing.
And
we'll sing, but like in the back.
Yeah, in the back. And so we have Makita McCreary is our deeply gifted choir director, and she's been just a precious gift. And so we started singing in a choir, having a choir. We had anywhere from, depending on the week, up to 24 young people there who would gather and sing. And we brought in a community of folks from choir and singers and musicians from the outside to come and sing together. And so that's how we started, and then built relationship from there, and then started offering individual pastoral counseling, really just time to talk with us. And then COVID shut everything down. And so we moved to assisting families and showing up in all the ways we can, even praying at the fence, delivering pizzas and cookies and letters and cards and toiletry items, and just trying to find other ways to show up and support kids who are very alone and isolated and in solitary confinement during COVID. And then, and since then, we also built a relationship with Chesterfield Juvenile Detention Center and have been invited as chaplains into that space. And so, and that's where we meet with kids in more of a small group setting there, and also offer some other arts programming. And so that's how we started. And it just really through COVID, it has been a real hard journey as things have been shut down, and Bon Air is currently shut down this month again for visitation. But the Holy Spirit keeps opening up windows and inviting us into new relationships. And so we're ever grateful for this. It just continues to evolve. Some of the kids we've gotten to know through the choir and through relationship. And as we get to know them, they invite us to come and to be part of their serious offender reviews that happen when they would be leaving their time at Bon Air, or we're invited to their court dates to come and be present with them when they're facing a hearing. And so that's a really important part of our work too, is to show up in those spaces to accompany those kids and their families, and to be a witness of love in a very hostile space.
Thank you. Yeah, I had to ask because I know that's where Voices of Jubilee came from, and I've heard some of that choir in the past, and I think it's just such a powerful, that singing itself is this joy-filled thing, right? That it was an invitation for you guys to be in joy with them, and it sounds like even in COVID, you guys are finding ways. That's amazing.
One of the really special gifts I feel like we've been given was that one of our young people shared with us that when he was singing with the choir for that time, he forgot that he was in prison.
This is actually the young person we visited today.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, that was such a gift to us to feel like we just showed up and sang, like, and and he is 7 hours away, or no, 8 hours away from his family.
Yeah.
Here on top of a mountain. We're in, Eastern Virginia, where they've blown off the top of a mountain. Western. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not good at directions. But, we've had to fight for 2 years to get to visit some of these kids as they've moved to adult facilities. And, I think that hearing that from him, and we've heard similar things from some of the other kids that we've gotten to visit in adult facilities, and we've been given these spaces in adult facilities that are pretty unique. We thought we would have to do traditional visitation, which is heavily monitored by COs. It's timed and crowded, and a door opened up, and now we get these very unusual unmonitored. I mean, they're monitored, but we're in a room with this young person, and we get to talk to them for hours, and it is so fun. It's so special. And so when he shared that with us, that, I think sometimes it can feel like we're programming and not scrambling things. We're not queering the norm, but hearing that from him was a real affirmation to continue.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, I think, Dave, did you have a question? I think we're at time, correct?
Yeah, I was about to say, I think we're at that time. Yeah, you got me.
So I wish we could stay and talk to you guys longer, but I appreciate so much the time that you've shared with us, especially because I know you guys are tired because you've had a big day visiting. And you guys graciously offered, I don't know which one of you was the one who decided to do it, but you guys said that you would offer a closing prayer and blessing for us. So we would really appreciate that. And thank you to everyone out there who has joined us this evening and come and listen to the very important work that Lauren and Ashley are doing. We're so grateful to have you with us.
Lord, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. Yeah. Thank you for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
And friends, let us pray. We thank you, God of life, for your light and your hope. We ask that you carry us across all of the borders that seek to hem us in. Guide our feet on your ways of love and peace and mercy, that we too might bear your light and find your light. Bless us now as we go forth into the evening, that we may be bearers of your light in the darkness. Amen.
Amen. Thank you both.
You.
All right, good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.